one that you kind of brought up earlier, which is how has, you've done game development, I've done game development, how does that change your point of view on writing about games? And I want to talk briefly about it because I played Duke Nukem forever. Well, no, because I have enough game development experience that I found that game to be super duper fascinating. Because how many people actually played Duke Nukem forever, as opposed to just heard about it? Okay, so if you played it, then you can kind of feel the different teams coming in and out on the design process. You can kind of feel where one level doesn't really belong. It was sort of super glued in the middle. And I don't have much insight about the specifics here, but if you just from knowing that what the development process of that game was like and how it was all this different turmoil and they kept changing engines and the design kept changing, you can kind of feel the different eras of game design being patched together through this one game that took this really long time to make. And I kind of found that really fascinating. And so I couldn't hate the game. I thought it was neat in a way, because there's just so much there to chew on.
there's a very fascinating, I guess we'd call it oral history of Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines that was shipped out unfinished. It was sent to die. It was running up against Half-Life 2, big release, and it got sent to die. And so it was released unfinished. And we're not talking oh, it's really buggy or it's unplayable, as in no, it did not have an ending. And it was released that way intentionally. And so when you're playing the game, and I have it on Steam because it got, due to the fan community and mods, kind of finally people looked into the code and kind of recreated the ending and fixed it. But you can kind of see, if you're playing the game, first third, great, voice acting is wonderful, for its time, and it's an RPG using the source engines, and it's great. And then you get about 2/3 through, and you just see oh, this is where they shipped it, oh dear.
I remember one of the big ones back before I was even doing kind of writing was Final Fantasy 12, where the director had a nervous breakdown making the game, quit, and then they gave it to the guy who made Saga Frontier, and he trolled everyone. One of the things that I've gotten from this is I am infinitely more patient with developers, especially if it's a small development team. I have gone on record publicly as saying that I do not hate E.T. for Atari. When you realize one guy did that in 4 weeks.
He didn't have very much time.
That is damn impressive for one guy in 4 weeks with none of the advances we have today. I have nothing but respect for Howard Scott Warshaw for doing that game, and it's because I've spent enough time on both sides of the aisle. I write 20 games I'm working on the game with the kid, and there's this game that I backed on Kickstarter called Elysian Shadows for the Dreamcast, and that guy who's doing that game has gotten screwed every step of the way by his development team up to the point where one of them stole the servers with the game on it. And even though I got $125 into that game, and I probably won't see it for another 5 or 6 years, I can sympathize with him. So I'm not going to go online and write a horrible, I've been scammed by Kickstarter, this is all this horrible stuff. Because you know what? Horrible stuff happens, and as long as there's transparency, I will accept that. And that is how it's changed for me. I am infinitely more compassionate and tolerant of game designers today than I ever have been in the past, because I have seen the other side of the fence, and I want to build the fence higher, because you cannot see.
You also, at least with me, it's also influenced my buying decisions about which games to buy. Especially if I, not necessarily that I know someone who's worked on it, but who here has played anything by Axis Games? Okay. Axis Games also did the 999 series and their escape. Yeah, they localized it. So I used to know one of the localization editors. And that was one of Mark Virtue's last reward.
What is that up job, by the way? Nice.
Yeah, it was actually very nice, yeah. But I'm I never really heard about the Zero Escape games before, aside from my friend describing 999 as this mashup of Battle Royale between and Troy. And yeah, it's not wrong, is the thing. And so I was okay, Zero Escape, kind of heard of it, but not really interested. And then I heard about oh hey, the localization is really good. Axis Games is known for its localizations. And then all of a sudden my ears are like, really, where can I buy this? You know? And it's gotten to the point now that if I see XT games or if I see Axis Games on a game cart label, I seriously consider buying it.
If it says Atlas, we just buy it.
If it's Atlas, it's just like, whatever, here's my money.
So we're close to our time, so let's take some audience questions real quick. I know I saw a hand up in the front. Did you want to come in? And then your hand is up. We'll go you first. Yeah, the two hands, fingers up. Yeah, go ahead.
You guys have only talked about written, but there's been tons of prolific YouTubers.
Oh, yes.
I was kind of curious.
Yes.
You know, I wanted to get to that, like how videos have changed this whole process. It's a great question.
I'm a huge fan of Pat Contry, and I'm a huge fan of James Rolfe, and I'm a huge fan of Gaming Historian. What I love about it is with video games, they are a visual and interactive medium, and when you see the gameplay footage, you see the YouTubers incorporating it in there, they give you a chance to at least experience it, and for some people that haven't had the opportunity to play a game, like for example, what Pat does with NES, he brings open those old school things, and I know that he does it on his own. That is something that I have enormous respect for. And what I love about YouTube is that YouTube, you tend to be in charge of your own destiny, and people will reward you for kicking ass and taking names.
I'm planning on doing a lot more video content than written this year for that same reason, because especially the game reviews are going a lot more toward video, and there's Twitch and there's Let's Plays, and there's Let's Plays really exploded, and yeah, it's a big deal.
I'm actually, in terms of video, as a developer, I'm kind of interested in this because I'm developing an RPG. RPGs are really hard to demo. If you go to an indie showcase, they're really hard to kind of set up a booth and have people play it at a show. And so having like a Twitch channel where I can say, okay, I'm currently in development, or I'm currently, working on footage of this game right now that asks me questions while I'm developing the game. It not only helps with transparency in terms of development, but I've also learned that for games that require more of a sit-down experience, that you can't just pick up the game and play it in 5 minutes and walk away. So narrative-heavy games, Twitch channels and YouTube channels are very good for that.
There's also archiving. One of the good things about video reviews is that you can build up a standing archive that you will eventually be able to show other people, especially if they can't get their access to the physical games. That's another reason why I like the retro gaming channels. Is if you don't have the money to buy yourself a Sega Genesis and a bunch of games, you can watch other people play through it. Let's Plays do a good job of that too. I tend to skew retro in my appreciation because it's very easy to go online and find modern contemporary games in the contemporary time period. It's a lot harder to find those old cartridge games that are very hard to play on a computer. So I do like how it helps with archiving, and I like how it gives you more impetus. I would say it's less journalism and more performance, more curating, more archiving, and more general appreciation than just straight journalism. And it crosses a lot of different fields.
Now that being said, because we're talking about video, the downsides of doing video, especially video reviews or video critique, is partly because as a woman,
you have to put your face on tape.
I have to put my face on tape, and I am very uncomfortable doing this because YouTube comments are a separate circle of hell.
You will never find a more wretched layer of scum and villainy.
So there is that as well. And also, in terms of my own personal preference, I don't watch a lot of Let's Plays or video content because it's not as accessible to me. Let me deal with the question of accessibility, what people can access. I access text a lot easier than video. I read really fast, and if I'm walking through the video, I have to kind of wait until that's done, and that's really frustrating for me. Mine does not work like
things
that.
that are more easy to access, like when you're on the train, for example, or commuting.
Right, but also in terms of, I know people, especially with autism, that cannot follow video content at all, and have to have a transcript along with it. So now you have to deal with questions of accessibility, of how people can access the content. Video content is great, but what if you're blocking off a whole segment of your population? What if the people that were following you for the written reviews now can't follow the video reviews? because they're blind, or because, you know, they have to use a screen reader or something. You know, then you kind of run into these questions that you kind of have to decide how to deal with that.
Another question, I'm in the front, go ahead.
I guess, like you mentioned, you need some experience, you need to have a portfolio of work, but once you have all that established, how do you make the leap from a relative greenhorn in the industry to where you're sitting, where you're telling your parents you have an article in Playboy or running for...
Everywhere, network everywhere, make it to the point where everyone knows your name. Don't cross over into infamy, but at least make it to the point where people know who you are. I mean,
MAGfest actually goes a long way in that.
Yes, MAGfest is great for that.
MAGfest is great for that.
Let's take a question from the back in the green.
Me?
Yes.
Okay, so what you said about getting review copies brought up a question in my mind, because I used to work for not a big outlet, but an outlet that was on Metacritic, and they threw review
I love
copies
not
out.
being on Metacritic. That makes me
Yes.
so happy.
No, it was huge pressure and it was terrible to, in a lot of ways. And since then I've moved into the video space too. But I was just curious as to how you think Metacritic affects reviews and how it affects your ability to obtain copies.
Okay, in terms of review copies and Metacritic is, most of the venues that I work with vastly prefer going away from number scores and more interested in the connections that people have to other things in the game. Or, oh, hey, we're going to analyze the art of this particular game, compare it to existing styles or what they're using. And so numbered reviews and that sort of Metacritic type style isn't what they're looking for.
Numerical reviews have this problem where it confronts your psychology. If you have to weight a review and the review shows up as say a 6 out of 10, your brain will automatically see that as, oh, this is not a good game, there's something wrong, because the way we are raised, you see numerical grades, and the higher the grade, the better it is. Whereas if you're doing something for quality, there could be a game that has the worst music you've ever heard, but everything else is great. If you're using a numerical for the music, it's going to drop the overall score and then drop the game. Whereas you can just follow the time-tested strategy of mute the damn game and play it for as good as it is. And I don't like numerical scores because technically a 7 is good, but colloquially a 7 is substandard. So moving away from numericals is good because you get value instead of quantitative. I prefer qualitative.